Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young, licensed clinical social worker. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, deep thinkers, thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about creativity, and Rachel Moore, who's a licensed marriage family therapist, joins us. We talk about the mistaken belief that trauma is the origin of our creativity. We talk about audacity. It's a term that Julia Cameron uses, and it talks about us being willing to show up and create for the sake of creating, without really having an end goal in mind. We also talk a lot about people have a tendency to think that being creative means that we're an artist or we draw or we paint. I have a really strong belief that creativity comes in all kinds of forms, and Rachel talks about it can come out in cooking. My belief, and maybe I'm wrong, is that it comes up just when we're out in nature, when we appreciate the texture of life. It can be enjoying the beautiful sights when we see flowers, or the sense of things, or enjoying colors. Like, I love petting animals. And so that's, I think, another form that we can be creative is enjoying the textures of things. I think creativity can be enjoying music or people. Everything that we reference is in the show notes. I hope it's an episode that you enjoy. I plan to do many more episodes on creativity because there is a pretty strong correlation between people that tend to be more sensitive and creativity. It's not 100%, but I have a feeling that when we use our creativity, it's part of how we calm and soothe ourselves. But the things that we may be doing, we may not identify as being creative, or we may not identify ourselves as being creative people. If you're finding these episodes helpful, please share them with other people. If you can go to iTunes and rate and review, if you listen on your phone, you can do it in the phone app. If you live in California and you're interested in working with me, jump on over to patriciayounglcsw.com. All right, and on to the show. Hey, Rachel, welcome.
Hi, Patricia. Thanks so much. I am super happy to be here.
I am so excited to have our conversation. I love all things creative and understanding more about creativity, especially how it relates to people that are sensitive or identify as being highly sensitive people.
I think that's great. Yeah, I do think that many of us who identify as creative also have the same traits as highly sensitive people. So I think it's a great melding of the two worlds.
Well, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but my guess is that people are far more creative and express creatively than they think they do. It's kind of like when I talk about play, that I think that we have these very fixed ideas in our mind of what play looks like, what creativity looks like. So my guess is that we're utilizing far more creativity than we even realize.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And when you were talking, what came up for me was, things like cooking, right? Something that many of us do every day or nearly every day. And all of the different creative choices we have to make when it comes to that. I do think that everyday creativity is something that happens a lot. And I think you're right that maybe we don't give ourselves enough credit for that, what you might call small a art as opposed to, capital A art. Mm-hmm. I think that, that happens a lot in life. We make creative choices all the time.
Ooh, I can't wait to get started talking to you about this. First, we have to follow the rules. These are Patricia's rules for the podcast.
Okay, I'm ready.
Do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
Yes, I do. Do I pass?
Right yes, you passed. You can stay. We may proceed. You can be on the podcast even if you don't identify as a highly sensitive person. And you can listen to the podcast if you don't identify as a highly sensitive person. When did you learn you were an HSP?
I think that I first heard of the term when I was in high school. I got the book or saw the book by Elaine Aron. Yeah, so it's been a while. I've known for a while.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I think I have mixed feelings about it. for myself, I don't want to see it as a limitation. I think that being sensitive is actually an advantage. And on the other hand, I want to honor that about myself, that I am highly sensitive. And so I'm going to experience life differently from maybe a lot of other people or the prevailing culture. So I guess, I think for me, I want to honor the term and also not misuse it in any way. Yeah.
And what would misuse look like?
I think for me personally, sometimes I can use it as a reason to not explore or not try new things if I think that it's going to be uncomfortable. So for me, one of the main lessons that I've been learning in life and will continue to learn is to feel comfortable in the discomfort. So yeah. So that's, and in order to do that, I need to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want it to limit me, kind of like I was saying earlier. It's that two-sided coin, right? It's like, I don't want to misuse it in a way that puts limits that aren't necessary on me. And I also want to honor that in myself too at the same time.
Yeah. One of the things I talk about a lot with my clients, and I was going to say, I don't hear a lot of other people talk about this, but a lot of other people don't talk to me. So maybe everybody's talking about it and I don't know.
Okay.
But I think often this isn't so much with creativity, but I think there's a crossover that often if we're in relationships or we're in situations where we feel uncomfortable, it's familiar discomfort, and we'd rather have that familiar discomfort than asserting ourselves, saying what we need, asking for what we want, because then we face an uncertain type of discomfort. And often people don't want to feel unfamiliar discomfort. At least I know what it feels like when it sucks in this situation, but how's it going to suck if I assert myself? And that's what I heard when you were talking about, wanting to feel comfortable in the discomfort.
Yeah, there's a phrase I often use with my clients, and that is, I know I'm in hell, but I know the names of all the streets.
Yep.
Right. So it's that choice. Do I want to stay? And in this case, hell is not discomfort. Hell is the familiarity and being stuck, I think. And we do talk about that a lot with creativity, right? That idea of being stuck. So yeah, is doing things the same way over and over again because it's familiar.
Right.
So do I want to stay there? Or, maybe I do. Maybe there's reasons why I do want to stay there. Or is it okay to risk something different and risk the unknown?
Right. And for people that are listening, I really want to say that it's okay if you're in a place where you know that you're not ready to make a change, you're uncomfortable, but this is where you're at. That's really okay. Having self-compassion is so important. And, I could sit and tell you 5 things in my life right now that are not the way that I want them to be. And for right now, I just have to go I don't have the energy to work on it. And I just have to accept that that's how it is. So I really have a gut reaction. I'd be curious to know your thoughts about this, Rachel, too. Like when I'm on Facebook or Instagram and I see these things of just do it, take the risk, jump out and do it. It's like, sometimes I feel like you don't get where I'm coming from. And when we're in that place, when we can take action, it feels great, but sometimes we're not. And I think as a highly sensitive person, seeing those things for me can often cause shame. And it's really okay to be exactly where we're at. And when we're ready to make a change, we will.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I remember I saw this thing on Facebook once and it was like, you're taking a quiz to see how much grit you have, right? This idea of grit being like, I'm just going to muscle through and so I took the quiz and I had very little grit. And I remember my response was, yeah, I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I know. I wish we could do a 2-hour podcast. I'm noticing that about the 45-minute mark is when people really start to open up and the conversation just flows.
That's really interesting, huh? Yeah.
The unapologetically sensitive marathon.
I love it. You can do it. Of all people, you can do it.
Is there another term that you wish were used instead of highly sensitive person?
What a great question. It causes me to think creatively. Let's see. Wow. Nothing comes to mind now. I just wish it was more accepted.
Yeah.
I just wish that, all kinds of people were more accepted. And then on the other hand, I got to admit that my ego says, but then you wouldn't be special.
Mm.
Maybe that's another misuse of me, with a highly sensitive label. Yeah. Is like sometimes it's very enticing to think of myself as different or the outsider or whatnot. And that, there's good and bad with that too. But I don't know. I don't know if there's a better term. Have you thought of one?
I haven't. I did see something that was done on rhesus monkeys, and they used the word highly responsive.
Oh.
And I really like that. Lauren Selfridge talked about, I'm so terrible with quotes, but it's like someone who feels the texture of life.
Ooh,
I just thought that was beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just need something like shorter than that, and that would be perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear about creativity. So go.
Okay. Indeed. What comes to mind, it's really interesting because we were talking about that sort of just do it mentality and things like this. And what comes to mind is that a lot of times, I often lead groups through, and sometimes individuals, but groups through the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Are you familiar with that book?
I love it. I did an Artist's Way group many, many years ago, but it's one of my favorite books. And I often suggest to clients that they do morning pages.
Yes. Fantastic. So really, to me, the whole gist of the book is self-acceptance. And the part I want to talk about right now, though, that's kind of like what we were talking about before, again, about the just do it and whatnot, is she does say several times in the book a phrase to the effect of sometimes audacity, not talent, confers fame. There's a lot in there, right? That's like, okay, do I want fame? What do I want with my creativity? And there's this idea that, how do I put this? I find it heartening to hear that, because that means that sometimes people just put themselves out there, and maybe they don't have a lot of talent, but they put themselves out there and they get feedback. I know this probably doesn't make sense, but I find it heartening because, I don't need to worry about whether or not I have talent. I don't need to worry about the outside world telling me that I'm creative or talented, because the people who get that are the most audacious people, and maybe I'm not that audacious.
So I have a comment and a question. What I'm hearing you say is it's really about the process, that we create for the processing, the enjoyment of creativity, and the goal is not about the outcome. Is that correct?
I think it's so beautiful that you got that and stated it so well. Yes, that's what I was kind of trying to get at is, that maybe the goal isn't fame, because really you could get fame if you wanted it and if you were willing to pay the price, I suppose, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's not about fame. It's about who am I as a creative person? What does that mean to me? And what does it give me as an individual? And maybe fame will come from that, or success, or however we want to define that. But yeah, it's about the process, not necessarily like the kudos I get for doing it.
And then can you talk a little bit about what the word audacity means to you? And maybe I can put you on the spot and ask you to repeat the phrase from Julia Cameron's book. I heard what you said, but I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a small phrase and there's a lot in it. Like I said, sometimes audacity, not talent, confers fame. So for me, I'll give you an example. I used to be a journalist, so I was a copy editor for 14 years before becoming a therapist in newspapers. And when I was in school to become a therapist, not that I wasn't working in the newspaper anymore, I still wanted to do some editing work. And so I would do freelance editing on books. And people would find me and have me edit their books. And it was really fun. I was always struck by the fact that here were people who were self-publishing, who wouldn't necessarily call themselves writers, don't have training in writing. I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing. I've never written a book. But here are these people who wrote a book because they wanted to. And I thought, and to me, that's audacious, right? That's like, I'm just going to go do this thing.
So I guess what I would say is when people feel like they have a calling or there's something that they really want to do, that instead of waiting for the degree or the invitation or feeling like they've gotten to that point, that if you feel compelled to do something, you do it because it's in your heart or mind to do it, regardless of whatever backing you have. That doesn't feel very well spoken, but that's the best I can pull out
I
of my
think
hat
it
right
is.
now.
I think I'm like so happy that I feel like you're taking all of my mash of words and like condensing it into this beautiful gem. So I'm like, could you just follow me around? Like, could you interpret for me? That would be
Sure. Side note, I actually was a sign language interpreter as a career before I was a licensed clinical social worker.
Wow. That's so cool. And I love that like we have these different careers before becoming therapists too. I think
Right.
I think it really can inform our practice, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, I've forgotten the question already because we have so many interesting things to talk about.
No, I think you answered. We were talking about audacity. So tell me some more about creativity.
So, yeah, I'd really like to talk about creativity in the context of sensitivity, too. And I know that, Patricia, I'd told you a little bit before we started recording about an experience I had about a year ago when I had the opportunity to be in a small group, like a salon, with the writer and physician Gabor Mate. He's a really interesting person. Y'all can look him up and see all the things that he's done and all the work he's done in the realm of addiction and things like that. So he wrote this book that I can't remember the name of right now, but hopefully I'll get that to Patricia and she can put it in the show notes. But he wrote this book about how our growing up experience can influence our health later in life. So he wrote about a particular musician and how she was super expressive when she played her music. I mean, in a beautiful, amazing way. And he said, like, the reason she was that way was because she had no other way of expressing her feelings. So my question to Gabor Mate, when I was able to ask a question was, okay, for me and clients I work with, other artists and creative people I know, oftentimes we have a belief that it is our trauma that is the origin of our creativity. And he immediately said, no, you're wrong. And I was like, great, please correct me. Because I kind of don't want that to be correct, right? And so what he said was, no, your trauma doesn't lead to your creativity. Your sensitivity is what makes you creative.
I love that.
It was so awesome to hear. And then he went on to explain a little bit more about how, and then he was explaining too that your sensitivity is a function of your being, just like, having dark hair or blue eyes or whatever, it's the way you were born is your sensitivity, and because you're sensitive, it leads you to be more creative. Like what did you say earlier about that definition of sensitivity, feeling the textures of life, right? I mean, to me, that is an artist, right? And an artist experiences the textures of life and then expresses that to everybody else. And then the audience gets to have the experience of either seeing something they've never seen before in a way they've never seen it, and or seeing this piece of art and saying, yes, thank you for expressing what I'm feeling. So yeah, the nutshell of that is like your creativity doesn't come from your trauma. It comes from your sensitivity. And he did say that trauma can affect the way that creativity is expressed, in whatever way that is, but it's not the source.
It's funny. I think about Van Gogh when I think of about trauma and creativity. And maybe it's just, I'm 55. So when we learned about Van Gogh when I was in school, I think that the way that it was presented was, he was a tortured artist. And so when we talk about that, that was the portrayal that I had of Van Gogh as an artist, was a tortured artist, which kind of fits into that myth of trauma is the origin of our creativity.
Yeah, I think that that is definitely one of the myths that we try to break. Well, I shouldn't use the word break. One of the myths that we try to question.
Dispel.
Yeah.
Dispel
this beautiful word. Again, please follow me around in life. That would be great. Yeah, that myth we try to dispel. One of the myths we try to dispel, like in the artist way. Yeah, this idea that if you're going to dare to be an artist, there must be something wrong with you. It's almost like, you have to be tortured. There must be something wrong, because who would do that? Who would, for example, sacrifice some 6-figure career to do art?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that way either. You also don't have to be poor to be an artist, but these are some of the things that we hear in the culture. Yeah.
Right. So for someone who's listening who says, I'm not very creative at all, What would you say to them, and how would you create an invitation for them to start having a shift in perspective to see the areas where they probably are having a lot more creativity? It just doesn't look like it.
Sure. Well, I think, interestingly, first of all, I might say, well, maybe not. Right? I would meet them where they're at and say, like, okay, maybe this isn't, creativity isn't your calling in life, and that's okay. Like, not everybody has to be creative in the same way. And then I might, kind of like you're saying, I might help them to see that perhaps they're, like, for example, I'll use somebody I'm close to. I'll use my husband as an example. He works in IT. He's a computer guy. It's really interesting that actually when he and I create something, we write songs together, we sing silly things, we do all this stuff, but I don't think he would ever say like that he's a creative person. Working with computers and solving computer problems, to me, has to use so much creative energy, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take like everything and then look at this problem that maybe you've never encountered before and say like, oh gosh, how do I do this? Another example is what I mentioned earlier with cooking. Another example could be like even like decorating your house, or gosh, I mean, it really is endless. And I think that the change in perspective would be, okay, I do a lot of creative thinking in my life. Just because, I'm not a painter or a writer or a musician doesn't mean that I'm not creative and using that part of me, and that part of me is really important. And also, I would say, look to your sensitivity to see where your creativity lies. And the last thing I want to say about that too is that sometimes, and this is true for me, I took a like strengths quiz or something like that. I think it was the VS Strengths Finder. I don't know. My number one strength was appreciating art and beauty. Right? Not even necessarily, being creative was in there among the list too, but like the act of appreciation is a really special act that involves our sensitivity and involves our creativity, because you have to be open-minded in order to appreciate art and beauty, right? Because it's probably something different that you've never seen before. Yeah, in all those myriad ways, yeah, I would encourage somebody to just open up their idea of what being a creative person is. And that it does involve like challenging some of those myths too.
I'm struggling a little bit. There's something that I'm finding is happening in my interviews, and so all I know how to do is to talk about it. And
please.
Yeah, I'm having like, I shouldn't be doing this.
You should. I'm going to encourage you. You should.
Thank you. I think what happens is I must have an idea or an expectation in my mind about how I think the conversation is going to go or what we are going to talk about. And then I obviously don't articulate that. And then when it goes a little bit sideways is a very strong word to use, but I don't know what other word to use. Like, then I kind of want to rein it back into where I'm feeling like I want it to go, but I don't feel like I go into these interviews having an expectation, but apparently I do. And I'll tell you, expectations in my life is like, that would be the subtext of my entire life is expectations. So I want to go back to something. I think I have a belief that more people are creative than they think that they are. And if somebody said that they weren't creative, I would probably be inclined to ask them, what are the things that they really enjoy doing when they feel like they're in their bliss or their happy place? Mm-hmm. Because I guess what I'm thinking about is wanting to, with you, kind of create a list of things that could be considered creative that people wouldn't maybe think of being as creative. Like, I think gardening can be creative.
Uh-huh. If it's okay with you.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you. What is the importance of helping people find their creativity for you? What would that mean to you?
I think it expands our perception of who we are. I think it offers a greater appreciation. I think that when we have language for things that we do, it helps to understand more of who we are. And this kind of ties into, I ask all my guests about play, and what I'm finding is the majority of HSPs really struggle with play, but the truth is we're all playing. It just looks different and we're not calling it play. And so I have this sense that it's the same thing with creativity. when we can identify things that bring us moments of pleasure or joy or bliss or just a relief, especially as sensitives, we tend to think a lot and sometimes worry a lot and plan a lot. So creating more of that balance where we're using these innate talents that we have feels like it's really important.
Okay, good. Here we go. So
why did you ask me that?
Why did I ask you that?
Yeah.
Oh, because I was curious.
Okay.
Honestly. So in The Artist's Way, she not only talks about the morning pages, she talks about artist dates. And sometimes for some people, and perhaps for, like you're saying, I really like what you said about how sensitive people kind of have a hard time identifying. I think what I'm hearing from you is that they might have a hard time identifying that the things they're doing are worthy, that it is a worthwhile exercise to play. It's a worthwhile thing to do, to be creative. I think that to me is where the issue lies. So in The Artist's Way, she talks about artist dates, and what you're supposed to do on an artist date, which you may know, is to take yourself out. Don't bring anybody else along, although sometimes it happens and that's okay too. But the plan is not to bring anybody else along, and really listen to what your inner child wants to do. In order to do that, you need to get in touch with your inner artist child, right? In whatever way is possible. So let me give you an example. One time I decided I was going to go on an artist date, and I was going to go to MOPA, the Museum of Photographic Arts here in San Diego in Balboa Park. So I go there, and I notice almost immediately that my inner artist child is like, what are we doing here? This is so boring. Why did you think this would be a good idea? Oh my God. Right? And instead of the adult part of me saying like, no, child, no, this is good for you. Right? Instead of shaming myself for having that response and thinking like, oh, I must not be a cultured person, or, oh, I'm like, whatever road I could go down in that way, I listened and I said, okay, I hear you. Would you like to go get some ice cream? And my inner artist child was like, yeah, that sounds great. So what I did instead is I left, I got some ice cream, sat and listened to, one of the performers play music in Balboa Park and had a grand old time. That was a creative act. And I think that really, I mean, we could make a list of things that are creative things that, like I said, cooking, you said gardening, like, yeah, we can make a list of things that I think that's not the issue. I think the issue is more about, is what I'm doing worthwhile, and who is it serving, and how important is that to me? And it's really making a shift into what I need and what I want and what my playful part, what my joyful part, what my whimsical part wants is important. Because if I ignore that, that child is going to get pissed.
Sure.
And that child is going to act out in ways that maybe I can't control, because our inner artist children will throw tantrums. And, that can come out as like, with our partners, right? Why are you bothering me? I need this alone time. Leave me alone, right? That's what happens. So I do think that it is worthwhile and it is important to listen to our creativity, to listen to the inner artist child, to acknowledge, like you're saying, that a lot of these things we do are creative and that we should do more of them, perhaps. Because that's an important part of our being. That's what brings joy to life. And that's what helps us feel more centered and connected, I think. I don't know. Does that feel more in line with kind of what you were thinking about?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So which comes first? I guess I'm thinking about the person who says, I'm not creative. Mm-hmm. I don't draw. I don't write. I don't sing. Like, I'm not even creative. Why would I even be interested? And I know for many years that if you ask me to draw something that's representative of something, it looks like a 4-year-old drew it.
Oh, me too. Yeah, totally. I have 4-year-old drawing skills. Yes.
Yeah. And so, there was a time when I would tell you, and there are probably certain types of art that I would not engage in because if my expectation is it's supposed to look like something, I feel like I fail. It almost brings up shame. Like, that doesn't look so great. But what I know is like color and design and words and music and texture, like those things excite me. But I wouldn't, there was a point in my life where I wouldn't have thought of that as counting because like I can't make something that looks like something.
Right.
And so I think that's the perspective that I'm coming from. So for those people that go like, I'm not an artist, I can't do that. Like, why would I even be interested? I think I'm trying to want to open the door a little bit where
Mhm.
somebody goes like, oh, you mean that's being creative?
Yeah.
So that maybe they'd want to walk through the door a little bit more. So I don't know if what you said about knowing that it's valuable, that someone's valuable and worthy, or do they first have to know that they even have it? And I don't know.
This is interesting, right? And some people, I mean, I honestly think that some people don't have any creative desires. I really do. I think that that is a possibility. However, you're talking about something different. It sounds like someone who does have, like yourself, like it sounds like you had a desire to draw, you had a desire to create, and then these colors and textures are what excites you, and you're drawn to that. I think, work with what you have, right? I would say, when I try to sit down and draw something, I usually end up crying.
Hmm.
And so I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
and I've decided that for me, that's okay.
Right.
And there's a thing, I often talk about this actually in coaching. I do, you and I've talked to, I do marketing coaching for therapists. I talk about this idea of recognizing your strengths and the 3 steps to recognize what's a strength. It's like, okay, number 1, do I look forward to it? Number 2, when I'm doing it, do I feel like I'm in the zone and time just disappears? And then number 3, do I feel stronger afterward? When it comes to creativity, I would follow that formula. And if there's things that you don't like and make you sad, and in my case, like maybe break down in tears, like, how about just don't do them? I'm giving everybody permission not to do them. Yes.
Is there a difference between creativity and being creative and appreciating the colors that flowers have, or enjoying the textures of petting an animal, or being somewhere where you're just taking in the scents, or like I love fabric stores. I love music, watching people, like those are all, like, they fill my senses up. Is that creativity?
Well, interestingly, again, to go back to Julia Cameron, because why not, and The Artist's Way, she calls that filling the well.
Okay.
In order to have something to say, you need to fill the well, right? In order to express yourself, you need to have a self to express, is what she would say. So when you're doing those things, that is a part of creativity for sure. It's necessary. Like I'm thinking about the writer David Sedaris. Do you know who he is?
I do. I have his book on my nightstand right now.
Fantastic. I read a really interesting thing from him a couple of years ago where he talked about, he got to a point in his career where he was super successful and all he was doing was going around doing readings. He wasn't actually living his life, so he had nothing to write about. Right? So he probably needed to take a step away, and he probably did, take a step away, live some more life in order to express himself. So I do think that that's an integral part of creativity, for sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about, and it's been, oh my gosh, it's probably been 20 years since I did The Artist's Way, so it's been a while. So I guess I'm thinking if there are people that are curious to explore a little bit more about creativity, I do think The Artist's Way is probably one of the best places to start. Even if you're not doing a group, I think just reading the book is amazing.
I agree. Also, Elizabeth Gilbert wrote another book. I'm looking it up right now.
Big Magic.
Big Magic, right.
It's one of my all-time favorite books. If you want to know about creativity, oh my gosh, the way that she talks about it. And one of the things she talks about that I love, I feel like I'm hijacking you. Are you feeling hijacked?
This is your show, Patricia.
I know, but remember, my wound is about being too much, even if it's on my show.
No, not too much. I'm feeling very happy and content.
I'm not even going to talk about this, but she talks about how she views creativity and how creative ideas come to us, which was an incredibly novel concept that I hadn't even thought about. But one of the things that I use a lot that she talks about is fear. And when you have fear, it's like taking a trip that fear doesn't get to sit in the front seat with you. It doesn't get to control the GPS. It doesn't get to listen to what's on the radio. Fear gets to sit in the back seat. So it's kind of like, we're all going to have fear that comes up for us, and we can't kick fear out the door, but we can put fear in its place. And so fear gets to sit in the back seat. I don't have very many favorite books, but that is definitely one of my favorite books. And she also has a podcast. She's not producing new episodes, but I think it's called Magic Lessons by Elizabeth Gilbert.
She does. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to take a moment to totally like name drop and tell you that I got to ask Elizabeth Gilbert about fear.
I'm fangirling all over you right now.
I'm just totally name dropping this episode. So yeah, she came to speak in San Diego, and there was a Q&A at the end. And so I stood up and said, my question is, do you feel nervous or scared before you come out and give these talks? And then I acknowledged that at that moment I was trembling because I was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the audacity to do it anyway, right? So she had an interesting response. She acknowledged that yes, she feels scared, and that what she does, although she realizes in some contexts it is important and good to share that vulnerability in the moment, right? And in others, she said that at other times, like when she did some talking tour with Oprah in front of thousands of people. She said, they want you to be the expert. They don't want you to necessarily talk about how scared you are to be there. And so what she does is that she prepares and prepares and prepares and prepares ahead of time, so that it's effortless for her. So anyway, preparation helps. But yeah, I think that, okay, so this issue of fear and creativity, for me, it's really helpful to recognize. That's why I asked Elizabeth Gilbert that question. It's really helpful for me to recognize that fear affects everyone.
Sure.
Right? Even if you've done it a million times, even if you're super famous or whatever. I'm reminded of, this is kind of random, but I watched a documentary on Netflix about the band Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And they toured with Jimi Hendrix in London. They're in England, like early on, totally random. And they were talking to Jimi Hendrix, and Jimi Hendrix, who we think of as this total, legendary performer, he was telling them like about his fear. He's like, I'm super afraid that I'm not going to be able to keep going, that I'm not going to be at this level, and I can't do it. So it's like everybody experiences that. And I think that's really important to know and to recognize, at least for me. Because it's debilitating for me to think that I'm the only one who goes through this, and that there's something wrong with me, right? Like it's shameful to be afraid. It's not shameful to be afraid. It's normal, and it means that you really care.
Well, and I think that there's a myth about we have to wait until we have the courage to do things, and the way that courage is a skill, mm-hmm. and the way that we develop courage is when we feel fear. We feel the fear, and we do the thing that we're afraid of, and that builds the muscle to have courage. And so fear doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Debilitating fear is not something that we want to shoot for, mm-hmm. but that fear in itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. And it's learning how to put fear in the back seat and still take your road trip. That's what develops courage.
I think you're right. And I really like what Brene Brown said, who I have not spoken to. So I'll just put that out there. She's not a BFF, but I like her. What she said about courage, she said, the origin of the word courage comes from core, C-O-U-E-R, or heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So having a strong heart, I like how you said building that muscle. It's like building your heart muscle, right? It's like having the strength to put yourself out there or not. And I do think it's important, that just popped in my mind. It's important too to recognize that if you have, I'll speak for myself. If I'm working on a project and it's in the baby stages, I need to treat it like a baby child and not expose it to a lot of criticism or just exposure right away. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a fully formed adult creative thing. And yet I need to be protective of it in the early stages. I think that's important to remember too.
Absolutely. And I just have to say that I have a wish list of guests for the podcast, mm-hmm. and Elizabeth Gilbert and Brene Brown are both on that list.
There you go. Let's manifest that. I'm ready.
I know. I have reached out to Alanis Morissette. She hasn't gotten back to me yet.
Oh, that's a great idea too. I'd tune in for that.
Yeah, I would too.
I love that you're thinking big. What gives you the courage to do that, to think so big?
I just feel like it's really okay to ask for what you want. And there's something about, I think it's where my high sensation seeking shows up. I think that my creativity shows up in a lot of my verbal skills, how I show up in the world verbally. And my high sensation seeking has to do with taking emotional risks. And I think that's thinking really big and just asking for what I want, knowing that I may not get it, but heck, I can sure ask for it.
I love that. That's actually pretty inspiring. Yeah.
Oh, it hasn't always been that way. It really hasn't. And so there's something about this, having this platform of podcasting and finding my point of view that has just something internally has shifted for me. Did you find that with your podcast?
That's amazing. Yes and no. I think that I'm laughing because I thought that it was going to be more glamorous. I thought it was going to be more glamorous. It turns out just to be kind of a lot of work. However, I find it in doing videos, actually. I have always been trained as a writer, like even since I was like 5 years old, right? I've identified as a writer, but writing for me is hard. It is so much work. And for me, do have such high standards with it because I identify with it so much. So for me, it's like, eh. However, doing videos, which I want to do more of, and just even doing spontaneous videos, I find really frees me up, and I do feel more audacious with that.
Yeah, I have the same thing with writing that I kind of grew up. This is probably not PC to say anymore, so maybe you can help me come up with a new thing. But, I grew up being the grammar Nazi.
Uh-huh.
So if I write, I get really hung up on which person do I write in. And so just like you, it's like if I do videos, I make bullet points and then I just show up and do it because my perfectionism can just paralyze me and then nothing ever gets done. And that just doesn't work.
Yeah, perfectionism is another big topic when it comes to creativity, right? It's like, I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, it's so big, I think, with a lot of us, we want to be protected. And again, I would say, if you're at the point with your creativity where it does feel too scary to be public with it or whatnot, like respect that and honor that. And also don't let it stop you, though. Don't let perfectionism stop you. That's such cheesy, easy advice. Again, Julia Cameron says, perfectionism is actually about ego.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about art. It's about protecting our ego and our image of ourselves, which I think is kind of, to me, hits me as harsh yet true.
Well, and Brene Brown says that if you've got perfectionism driving, then shame is riding shotgun.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's really about shame. So, yeah, it's a tough one.
But I think there, too, that there are ways, like I really enjoy making cards and I have a die cut machine and I use, dies for things because of my perfectionism. And there are certain things that I can't get perfectly, like the die cut. That gives me the precision that is really important because I have such a fine eye for detail, but it's a way that it's a workaround.
I love that.
I think that there are lots of ways, if there are things that we like, that there are ways to figure workarounds if our perfectionism hangs us up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. And to go back to the concept of drawing skills being at the 4-year-old level, I know that there are successful cartoonists out there, for example, that you can tell that they don't have a lot of skill, and yet they just do it anyway. They just use, like I said, use what you have, right? They just use what they have. They do it anyway, which I have to admit, as I'm saying that out loud, has kind of been a hidden creative dream of mine, is to have some sort of cartoon. I don't even know what that would look like. I've never fleshed it out, but yeah, but I think the things that stop me are those ideas that, there's also for me, songwriting. I love writing music. I love writing songs. In fact, for my wedding, instead of saying my vows, which I did protect myself as being a sensitive person, there's no way I could stand up in front of everybody like that and explain my emotions about somebody. Mm-hmm. So what I did instead was I wrote a song. My friend helped me record it and I played the song.
Aww, I love that.
Thanks. And she told me something really valuable. I said something like, oh, I should have a disclaimer about this song. She's like, no, have a claimer. Claim it. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm doing. I was like, wow, cool. And yeah, nobody came up to me like, oh, you failed. You didn't say your vows out loud.
Right.
So it was a creative solution, kind of like you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
For what you need to do. Yeah.
Well, and your wedding is an expression of how you want to express your love and caring for your partner and for the people that were there to witness that.
Exactly. And to go back to the track of perfectionism, a lot of times what stops me from writing songs is this. I don't know where I get this idea, but I get this idea that I have to know every literary allusion or every metaphor or everything in the world in order to write a song. I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, I think that with perfectionism, the bar is so high that because we can't meet that expected level, I can't think of a better word, we can't match what that expectation is. So I find for myself that I often have to, it sounds kind of silly. I'm a little embarrassed to say it out loud, but it's like I kind of have to take the bar to the ground and figure what the worst case scenario is.
Nice.
And then there's really no place of falling from there because I'm already kind of there.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I've done that.
It gives me the freedom. I mean, done is better than perfect is a mantra that I have to use a lot of the time. And I have to say, even with the podcast, there are times when the sound quality is off. Things are just not perfect. And it's like, if I sit on stuff until it's perfect, nobody's ever going to hear my voice.
Yeah, if I sit on stuff till it's perfect, nobody's ever going to hear my voice. Truer words have never been said.
So, Rachel, what do you do for play?
Oh, what do I do for play? Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I feel inadequate already. Interesting response. I dance in my house to music.
Mm-hmm.
I dance in my office to music. Not with other people around in either case. Although sometimes with my husband around, I tried to do a silly dance and make him laugh, but he tends to ignore me. Other things I do for play is I like to get lost.
What do you mean?
Well, I'll just kind of wander around a neighborhood I'm not familiar with and like poke around. One of the most fun things I've ever done was one day several years ago when I had to go to jury duty. You're not thinking fun yet, I'm sure, but
not there yet.
I had to go to jury duty and then I got released and I walked home. So those of you who are familiar with San Diego, I was downtown and then I walked home to where I was living in South Park at the time. And so I walked home probably through like Golden Hill and some other neighborhoods and I just took pictures. And I found the most interesting things. I love taking pictures. That's something I definitely do for fun. And that's one of those things too we were talking about earlier. I've got so much around writing that it's almost ruined for me. Well, taking pictures is a way that I can get in the zone and use my creativity and use the tool of the camera, right? I'm not having to draw, so I don't cry. So using the tool of the camera to see the world in the way that I see it. Or even if I, even if the picture itself doesn't capture it, I can edit the photo, I can put filters, I can work with the contrast, or blah, 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 to create that. Always with my pictures, I'm creating an emotional experience is my goal. That I definitely do for fun. But actually, if you go to my Facebook page and you dig around, you can find my jury duty walk photos from years ago. So yeah, stuff like that. Taking photos, going on walks, getting lost. As we're talking, I'm wishing I did more fun things. So this is good for me to recognize. Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think that taking pictures is a break from the cognitive task of writing to a switch in the part of the brain where we use whatever our part of our brain uses for visual intake? And so it gives us some relief from that overthinking to a different part of the brain?
Most definitely. And it reminds me of when I did work in newspapers. It was always a nice break to do some design. I do not consider myself a natural design person. I'm more of a natural word person. However, I learned skills and I worked hard on it. And it was really nice on those days, especially because I could listen to music. When I'm editing, I can't listen to music. But when I'm doing design work, I can listen to music. And yeah, exactly what you said. Use that visual part of my brain that gives the wordy part of my brain a break. Yes, precisely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is it that you like to get lost or is it that you like to explore?
I like to explore.
Ah.
I love to explore and I love getting into that mode of having no idea what I'm going to find and just going for it and checking stuff out. Yeah, I love it.
So it sounds like there's a lot of curiosity there.
Yeah, curiosity and adventure, right? Yeah, that makes me really happy.
I can hear it in your voice.
I can too.
What are some of your superpowers?
Oh boy. I have the ability to do what I've referred to as emotional aikido.
And tell us what that is.
I'm not super familiar with Aikido as a practice, to be honest.
Okay.
However, I do understand it to be a way of taking another person's energy and redirecting it instead of confronting them. So in my work as a therapist, sometimes in life, yeah, I feel like I have the ability to, I don't even know how I do it exactly, but I'm going to try to describe it. Like I will step into the discomfort with the person. So someone says, for example, I am so mad. And instead of saying like, oh, why are you mad? Like, you've got all these things to be, I don't know, like, right? Instead of confronting it or objecting to it, I'll step into it and I'll say, yeah, you are really mad. And it's almost that by acknowledging and telling the truth of the emotional situation will shift. Right?
Well, I think so many times, especially as highly sensitive people, we see and perceive things that other people don't. And when we tell them about it, we're negated. And so I think especially for HSPs to have somebody that's willing to come into our world and see things through our eyes to go, yeah, I'd be really mad too. I really get that.
Yeah.
Can be so validating. And I think one of the reasons why when we've got wounding as an HSP, that we're referred to as being dramatic, because when we perceive something and people don't see it, we have to keep amping it up to get people to listen to us. And then we're told that we're being dramatic. But it's like if the house was on fire and you say, hey, fire guys, and nobody listens, you're going to have to keep yelling fire until somebody finally listens to you.
Yep.
So to have somebody jump into your world and acknowledge what you're feeling and be in it with you, that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think that, with any sort of situation, I have people come to me. I was a hospice volunteer during my internships. I was a counselor at hospice, and I'm super glad for that experience, by the way. And a lot of what I learned in that experience is just being with people, because I can't stop the fact that your family member is dying or you are dying, right? There's nothing I or you can do about that. And so let's just talk about where we're at and the reality of the scenario that a person feels either really sad or really scared. Yes.
Yep. I too interned at hospice for my graduate work. And it's so interesting in a lot of and I'm not trying to call anybody out, so I'm not trying to shame anybody, but I often see so many posts in the therapist groups about, what interventions do I use? And, like my client isn't making progress and I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, sometimes just being with someone is so incredibly powerful and healing. And sometimes we don't have to do anything. We just need to show up and be with people.
Yes. I think that sometimes that is exactly necessary. I think this idea that I have to do this or that for somebody else, again, I think that, like you said, not shaming, because I've been there too, for sure, and have to think about this all the time. It's about my ego. Right? It's about, am I doing a good job? And maybe if the only measure or one of the main measures I have for that is that I have to say something clever or I have to do an intervention or that would be really hard to know if I'm doing a good job when in fact, perhaps doing the best job in that moment, yes, would be to sit and listen. And, sometimes I've told clients, I'm just like, I don't know what to say right now.
Yep. It's interesting. I see we're at the 55-minute mark, and now the conversation is like, I want to talk about a ton of stuff.
Now it's getting interesting. Yeah.
I have a client I've been working with for probably a year and a half now, and without disclosing too much information, I know I'd have permission, but I don't want to do that. I started seeing this client for a very, very specific reason that has not been resolved at all. And so every couple months, I just check in because I want to make sure that I'm not colluding with the client to not be working on this issue, which pretty significantly impacts this client's life. But it's so interesting because this client will tell me, like, you have done so much for me. And I think because there's so many other things and there's so much trauma that we're just building the foundation, and we need to build a pretty solid foundation before we're ever going to get to this issue that's really limiting this person's life. I feel compelled to ask about it because that thing of like, this was the presenting problem and we're not even talking about it, but we're working on so much other stuff. Sometimes it's just what you got to do.
I totally agree. It reminds me, so I'm an EMDR, primarily an EMDR therapist. I'm movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I remember hearing someone talk about maybe the benefits or the drawbacks of EMDR. And the way that they put this, I thought was really cool. And they said, maybe EMDR isn't always the best way because relational problems need to be dealt with relationally. And in EMDR, we aren't necessarily doing it. Now, I try my best, and I think I do okay at it, at working on the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, always. Like, I keep that in the front of my mind. And yeah, I think that sometimes, and as you were talking too, I was thinking that like sometimes the problem isn't actually the problem. Right? The problem, if I come into you and I say, well, XYZ is what's bothering me, maybe what's actually bothering me is that I've never had a trusting relationship with anybody. And so maybe in this context of therapy, I can work on that. And I wouldn't necessarily know that as a client. And yet that's what's happening. And again, I say again, because I think about this all the time. I'm reminded of Irvin Yalom saying that the healing part of therapy is the relationship.
Absolutely.
And the stuff we do. Yeah, the interventions, even EMDR, like, even though I do think it has some amazing effects, the stuff that we do is just because you got to have something to do.
Yep.
And the benefit is really building the relationship.
Yeah. Rachel, what would you tell your younger self about being a highly sensitive person?
Well, I found out, luckily for me, when I was fairly young, I found out I was a highly sensitive person. I think that I would tell myself that it actually is an advantage, and it is my advantage. In a way, it's my unfair advantage in life, that I see things differently from the way other people do, and that's a good thing. I can help them, which is important to me. I'm an Enneagram 2, by the way. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I am the helper in the Enneagram world. It's important for me to be helpful, and the best way I can be helpful is to be attuned to and respect my sensitivity. That's what I would tell myself. Thank you.
I love that. Rachel, tell us about the projects that you're working on and where people can find you.
Sure. So actually, I'm super excited because in December, I'm not sure when this will air, but in December, I'm going to be moving into my own permanent full-time office. So that is very exciting for me. That's my next big project. And then after that, probably in February, I'm going to be launching my next Artist Way workshop therapy group, which is always my favorite thing to do in life, like not just at work, but in life. That is my very favorite thing to do. So people can keep an eye out for that. And I am in San Diego accepting new clients for EMDR. I primarily work with creative people, artists, writers, musicians, and and other types of people as well. And you can find me online at rachelmoorecounseling.com.
And you also do consulting, right?
I do coaching thank you for reminding me. I do lots of different things and I forget.
I did some coaching with you and you were really, really helpful.
Oh, thank you. I do coaching for therapists regarding marketing, and I call it creative marketing for therapists. And, sometimes one person asked me, she said, do you think that being on Instagram is valuable? And my question back to her was like, do you like being on Instagram? Because if you don't, it's not going to be valuable. So that's kind of the approach I take. It's like, I can't tell you the best methods for marketing. What I can help you do is find the methods for you that are going to be fun and playful, to bring it all back to play, right? Because as my favorite marketing person says, the marketing that's fun is the marketing that gets done. And I think that's true for everything in life. What's fun gets done, right? So that's another advantage of being playful.
And you have a podcast.
I do have a podcast. Thank you again for reminding me. I just do like whatever my calendar tells me is next. That's how my life runs. So yeah, I have a podcast that I am co-host with my good friend Booney, who is a coach, and the podcast is called Sparkles Podcast. We've been at it for almost a year now, and it's a lot of fun. And it is aimed towards highly sensitive people, INFPs, ENFPs, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, and also therapists. So those are our people, and we talk about all kinds of different things, including creativity and sensitivity.
And what platforms are you on if people want to tune in to find you?
Sure. Sparkles Podcast, you can find us on iTunes. We are also on Android. I can't remember specifically which podcaster, whatever. What's the word for that?
There's Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher.
Yeah,
One of those?
it's on one of those.
Okay.
Yeah, one of those podcatchers. That's one of my favorite words, by the way, podcatcher. I don't know why. You'll find us. Or if not, just ask me.
Okay. Sounds great.
Cool.
Rachel, thank you so much for being here today. It was really a fun conversation.
You're very, very welcome. And I am looking forward to hearing you talk to Elizabeth Gilbert.
Me too. I'll let you know when I book her appointment.
Yeah, I'm excited about your podcast. I'm so happy that you launched it, and it was great to be here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful you took the time to listen. If you feel so inclined, I would love to hear what you are doing that makes you feel creative, what you enjoy doing. We have a Facebook group at Unapologetically Sensitive. Well, that's what it's called. Or you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and my email is there. I'd love to hear from you and hear, what do you do for play? What do you do for creativity? Do you feel like you're creative? Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.